Do you consider yourself to be a perfectionist? And if you do, I wonder, do you consider that to be a problem at all? Many people don't realize that there is a big difference between healthy striving, holding yourself to high standards, and unhealthy perfectionism. In this video, I am going to explain to you exactly what those differences are and give you some tips for dialing down that perfectionism if you realize that it's actually a problem for you. I'm Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist, mindfulness meditation teacher, host of the Crappy to Happy podcast, and author of the Crappy to Happy books. And I am here to help you to overcome the barriers that get in the way of you living your happiest and most meaningful life. I'd love for you to subscribe and to hit the bell to be notified of when I post a new video every single Tuesday. So let's talk about perfectionism. Perfectionism is a personality trait, it's a character trait that can get you a lot of approval, a lot of validation, and often it gets you good outcomes. You do high quality work, you hold yourself to very high standards. On the downside, too much perfectionism can cause some really serious issues. It's related to anxiety, it's related to self-criticism, self-judgment, and is even linked to control issues, body image issues, eating disorders, OCD, really serious stuff. So how do you know when your perfectionism is getting a little bit out of control? Obviously, there is nothing wrong with wanting to do a good job, with holding yourself to high standards, with displaying attention to detail, with being meticulous and being thorough in your work. When that healthy striving turns into unhealthy perfectionism is when you hold yourself to impossibly high standards and then you measure your self-worth against your ability to meet those standards. It's when there is zero room for error, there is no room for mistake or for anything less than perfection. It's characterized by self-criticism and self-judgment. It takes all the joy out of simple activities. It leads to control issues where you hold all of the people around you to the same standards that you hold, which means that it can get in the way of your relationships. It means you spend excessive amounts of time checking and rechecking your work, often, just to make minor tweaks or minor changes, rather than accepting that something is good enough. So let me ask you right now, which one do you think you are? Do you think you have a healthy striving for excellence, for doing the best work that you can do, but you're willing to accept that good enough is good enough? Or do you think you fall into the unhealthy perfectionist camp, where you take an all or nothing attitude? If it's not worth doing perfectly, don't bother doing it all, where you procrastinate, well, there's a lot of fear of judgment and criticism that is driving those perfectionist tendencies. Leave me a comment below if you've suddenly realized that maybe you fall into the unhealthy perfectionist camp. And if you know you are a perfectionist and that it's actually making you miserable, good news, I've got some tips for you that will help you to start pulling back on that perfectionism and maybe embracing some more realistic standards and maybe learning to tolerate a little bit of discomfort so that you can accept that good enough really is good enough. So tip 1 is to reality check your standards. Maybe it's about asking other people around you whether they spend as much time as you do checking and rechecking their work. How much time do your friends and colleagues spend on working on a report or an assignment? What are the standards that other people measure themselves by in terms of their appearance or their ability to stick to a diet or a health plan? What are their standards in terms of their maintaining a household or any aspect of life, really? Perfectionism can come into every aspect of life. And look, I know what is going to be challenging for you perfectionists with this is that you will say, well, that might be okay for other people, but I hold myself to a higher standard than that. I don't judge other people, but this is what I expect from me. So then I need you to ask yourself, what are those standards costing you? In order for you to maintain that level of perfectionism that you aspire to, what is it costing you in terms of your time, effort, energy? What's it costing you in terms of your mental health? Are you lying awake at night stressing over some minor mistake that you might have made? How much extra time is it taking you to do simple activities because you have to check and recheck and make little tweaks and changes? At the end of the day, what are those standards costing you? And then when you realize that actually they're probably costing you a lot in terms of your time, your energy, your mental health, your relationships, then it's about challenging some of that perfectionist thinking. What do you tell yourself will happen if you lower your standards? What's the worst thing that would happen if you produced work that was not perfect? What do you think would happen? How do you think people would judge you? Unhealthy perfectionism is often driven by fear. There's a fear of judgment or a fear of criticism. So it's really important for you to look at what is it that you are actually afraid of. What do you think is the worst thing that will happen if you allow those standards to slip? When you've identified those perfectionist thoughts, it's really important to try to bring a balanced perspective to that. These are stories you've been telling yourself for so long that you just take them to be true. You just accept them as truth. But if this is not true for everybody, then it's not truth. It's just a belief. It's just a story that you have continued to tell yourself. Ask yourself, is this true for everybody? Or is it just true for me? Is it helpful for me to think like this? Because if those perfectionist thoughts are leading you to procrastinate, which they often do, if they lead you to quit on projects or on tasks because you're afraid that if you don't do it perfectly, it's not worth doing at all, then look at whether those perfectionist thoughts are really serving you or whether they're actually getting in your way. Usually you will find that thinking like a perfectionist, that believing that the only possible outcome is to produce perfection and nothing less, it's actually oftentimes leading you to produce nothing at all. So while somebody else is putting work out that is good enough, they're making progress, they're moving towards goals, the perfectionist is stuck, paralyzed, procrastinating, or taking a ridiculous amount of time to get anything done. And that is not the way to achieve what you want to achieve in life. So when you've identified that, then it's time to do some hypothesis testing. And this is where things get very, very uncomfortable for the perfectionist, because this is kind of a form of exposure therapy. This is when you take those perfectionist thoughts, you take those ideas about what's the worst thing that will happen if you produce a report or submit something or send an email or let the house be messy, and you've told yourself what the worst thing is that will happen, and then we go to work at testing that hypothesis just like a scientist. This is where you send the email after you've proofread it maybe once instead of 5 times. It's where you submit the assignment even though you know that it's probably not completely perfect, and rather than spending another hour or another day or another week polishing it up, you let it be good enough and you submit it anyway. And then you check to see what the results are. Are you judged? Are you criticized? Do you fail? Does the world end? Usually there is no terrible outcome. So this is where you start collecting evidence that actually challenges your perfectionist thinking. But you have to allow yourself to tolerate that discomfort and do something that is less than perfect. And this is where it is really, really challenging for perfectionists. But it's also really, really worth it when you start to learn that good enough really, honestly is good enough. I have one more tip that I would like to share, and I think this is probably the most important one. I think if you are prone to that perfectionist thinking, then it's really important to look at where is that coming from. Because if you believe that the only way to be accepted, to get approval, to get validation, or to make progress in life is to hold yourself to an impossibly high standard, to be perfect in everything that you do, there is a deep fear that is driving that. It's a fear of judgment, it's a fear of criticism, and often it's you who is highly self-critical. It's you who is judging yourself harshly. I want you to consider for a minute that if you believe that only by being perfect will you get approval or validation or will people like you, but in fact the opposite of that is true. When you hold yourself to impossible standards, when you believe that perfection is the only option, you are often very sensitive to any sort of perceived criticism. You often keep walls up so that people don't get too close to you, so that they don't see your vulnerability. You can often be quite defensive, and you keep people at arm's length because there's this constant fear of disapproval or of judgment. And rather than making you more likable, it actually makes you unrelatable. It gets in the way of human, authentic, warm connections with other people, because in fact it is in our imperfection in our shared vulnerability and all of our shared flaws, that we find that common ground and that we make real and lasting connections. So this is not just about gaining back time at work. It's not just about gaining back some peace of mind. It's about actually gaining back the opportunity to have real, warm relationships with other people, because that perfectionism, I can almost guarantee you, is getting in the way of that. At the end of the day, the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our relationships. And so if your perfectionism is getting in the way of you making those connections, it is affecting your whole quality of life. So maybe you want to try dropping your guard a little, allowing good enough to be good enough, sharing some vulnerability, and embracing the messiness that is real life. I hope this video has been helpful to you. Please do drop me a comment to let me know which tip you found the most useful. And look, I would really encourage you to, if you haven't already, to take my free 7-day happiness challenge. It's just an email from me to you every day for 7 days with a different tip for how you can be happier in life. I'll put the link to that down below. As usual, I would love for you to subscribe. I'd love for you to leave me a comment to let me know if this has been helpful, and I will see you the same time next week.